Happy Thursday, folks. And today we're going to double your pleasure because you're going to get not just one, but two of the most brilliant critical thinking minds in Ireland. We have Eddie Hobbs on. Great to see Eddie.
Oh, thank you, Ivor. Nice to talk to you again.
Always is. And our interview actually down in, I don't know, Ballydehob or somewhere down the wastes of Cork went very.
Skibbereen during the summer.
Green. Yeah, that went down really well. So a lot of truth bombs there. But today we're going to go crazy on truth bombs because your book, and it's shown in the background here, though the Canon is bokehing it out. That's my new 75-inch screen. Is Breaking the Silence. And this book came out a few months ago. It's essentially free, though great if people can donate. But it goes through and catalogues the rise of totalitarianism, which is clear and present to some people, but only the minority. And this hopes to illustrate to maybe less aware people just how bad it's getting.
Yeah, well, the objective of the book really was to try and condense 4 years of being in this area, looking at it, going to, as you know, going to conferences, reading books, doing the research. I wanted to try and produce something that people who are already in our echo chamber, and I cover that in the book, by the way, which we'll get into in a moment, could actually give some one of the naps, as I call them, the NAPs, the nearly awake persons. And because that's all we can convince at this stage. Those that are completely and utterly involved in the manufactured ignorance around the whole thing and are happy to stay in it will not be rescued. It's going to take a major shift for that to happen. We know that that's not just me, that's from the research, from the works of Professor Matthias Desmet, who you've interviewed, and I did recently as well. He's bringing out a second book, by the way, in 2025, where he gets into propaganda in a big way. And I get into, so the book is quite extensive, like it's nearly 500 pages long. It covers a lot of the major thinkers in the area that I've interviewed or researched or had researched for me. And so there's quite an extensive reference field in the book. And so you're in there as well is RIP Francis Boyle, who is an Irish citizen as well as an American citizen. He died there on the 30th of January last week, and he was the founding father. He wrote the 1998 American Anti-Terrorism Bioweapons Act. He wrote it himself on his own, and both sides of the house passed it straight away. So this guy was the world leader in bioweapons law as well as looking at it. And in January 2020, he immediately said what was happening. Well, that's a bioweapon,
Mm.
and he stuck to his guns. He was very close friend now of Robert Kennedy and Merle Nass and that gang, that produced all those wonderful books. Brilliant man, a huge library of archive of papers and books that he's written. And the thing
Mm.
was that, and this is all part of what's in the book, of course, that like he was subject to 60,000, Ivor, 60,000 attacks on newspapers over the next 2 weeks, all over the world, articles left, right, and center. And when I started to get into this, and I found it very hard to reach the point where I accepted it, which I now do quite clearly. I didn't accept it easily. That the whole thing was executed, as you well know, with military grade skills and military grade speed and ruthlessness. This wasn't just corporate world, wandering around, trying to create huge profits for themselves. This was far more malign than that. So that's why in the book, I've twice interviewed him and read his two books now, which is Professor David Hughes of the University of Lincoln. Now, what makes him particularly interesting is that he is a career-long expert in espionage. That's the nicest name for it. International relations, they call it, of course, in academia. But he's gone into all of that torture, mental torture, manipulation, propaganda, how it works, who the players are, and he's applied all of his knowledge to what's gone on. And he's absolutely doesn't pull any punches. He's convinced that this thing was orchestrated. He's naming the runners and riders. His books go right back to the origin, which was at the end of the Second World War, when the Americans went after the top bioweapons experts from Japan and from Nazi Germany and brought them over to set up their bioweapons lab in Fort Detrick, or Dietrich as they might pronounce it, in Maryland. and then then gets through the whole thing from then on. What happened after that, and the players. So he's absolutely convinced, as I am, by the works that I've got involved in researching and writing in the book, that what we're actually witnessing is the return of totalitarianism, but it's 21st century style. It's much more subtle, much more nuanced, but actually more powerful because it is using the technology that we all now just take for granted, with great skill and dominance. Goebbels and Hitler and his gang and Stalin and his gang, Bering was his name, wasn't he? He was chief spy. Would be licking their lips at the idea of being able to divide their nation into echo chambers and to feed the different echo chambers different propaganda and keep them separated from one another and isolated and alienated. And people might find this as extraordinary, but surely with all of this communication, we're in more touch with one another. But in point of fact, the research shows we're actually not. There's a big increase in loneliness throughout the world. People feel alienated. The critical thinking, which I cover in the book as well, has collapsed worldwide. We're not in debates. We don't engage in debates because of the whole cancel culture thing, and we're self-policing ourselves on the words we use. All of that, none of that is by accident. That's the point. This is all manufactured, all the ways down to the queering of kids' classrooms through UN, the UN agenda. That all comes straight out of Marxism, and all the ways through to from Germany in the early 1920s, and all the ways through to the United Nations, and then into Ireland, where it's been led by a small number of very influential Irish academics in UCG and in DCU, and they've been pushing this affirmation ideology, which is basically grounded in an activist organization called WPATH, which started in 1979. And this affirmation ideology says, well, somebody feels they're in the wrong body, we all get behind them and support them on their feelings. And if they want to socially transition or go much further and surgically transition, we'll all support them. That's the way we should be doing it. And of course, it's highly dangerous. We know that, common sense would tell you that. But there's been 4 years of research, as you know, in the United Kingdom, headed by she'll come to me in a moment.
Pass.
Yes, Cass, sorry, correct, you're correct, Barbara Cass, professor. And it says, well, there's the science, and the science shows that this affirmation ideology is actually not a neutral act, which is nice English polite speak for it's bloody dangerous. If somebody was right, if it was an Irish person right, this is bloody dangerous for children, it shouldn't be done. So the Brits, in fairness to them, just like they did after the scare over thalidomide back in 1961, when the German doctor Lenz came out and said this thing is causing deformities in babies. The Brits, 5 days later, after the Germans did it, they pulled it from the market. Ireland pulled it from the Irish market 4 years later. 4 years.
Mhm.
And RTE covered it in a documentary 10 years after that. That's how Ireland works, folks. And that's why Ireland is far more culturally vulnerable to manufactured propaganda, manufactured ignorance than many other races.
Yeah.
Because that's the truth of it. I mean, I cover it there in one of the chapters in 1925. I think there was a Department of Education study into Irish education institutes, and they created a major alert within government. There's kids being abused here. This is shocking stuff. We need to do something about this. So the government were quite aware of what was going on, officially aware, but kept tight, and they decided to bury the report because of Irish exceptionalism. We're the smartest people on the planet. We're also the most Catholic. We've got our own country going here now, and we can't be lifting the lid on this. This just won't. So it was buried. So Irish children then were subject to what about 50 years of the children in that area were subject to 50 years of abuse, rape, and some of them murdered. And that's what happened. And the Irish turned a blind eye. And that's why the latest film with Cillian Murphy is about that. They don't use the term that I use in the book, which is the Greek term agnogenesis, manufactured ignorance. And that we can talk a bit about that maybe, but that whole area of study of propaganda and how it's done, how manufactured ignorance is created. Ireland is an absolute case study in it because we are, from a media perspective, the North Korea of Europe. That's the truth of it. Like RTE, the Irish Times, and the Independent and the Examiner. That's our mainstream media. throw in news talk and a clatter of regional radio stations, and that's it. And I can tell you, because as recently as last year, senior editors in some of those aforementioned members of mainstream media refused to carry any op-eds about, in other words, any writing that would be critical of the World Health Organization, as recently as last year. And a producer of one radio station, local radio station, told me that their license was threatened the last time they mentioned the WHO. The fact that Ireland was a member of it didn't seem to matter. They were still under orders. So Ireland locked down in Q1 2020. And when people like me and people like you and others were saying this is wrong, and they were deplatformed, people lost their licenses, doctors, the handful that stood up lost their licenses, and we know the rest. And an awful lot of what was mainstream sort of counter narrative stuff that was knocking around, all of it's come true. All of it's found to have been accurate. And I just found it extraordinary that this week, as Elon Musk and the DOGE get stuck into USAID, what comes out? $38 million payment to Ben Hu, HU, as opposed to WHO. And who is Ben Hu? Well, Ben Hu is the second in command to the bat lady, as you know, Xi Zhenli. And who's Xi Zhenli? Well, she's the bat lady in Wuhan. And what were the Americans doing giving 38 million to Ben Hu, by the way, who got sick back in November 2019? Of course, it was to actually pay for the gain of function, in other words, weaponizing the bat virus. It was being done using US technology, which was patented by Professor Barrick at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And he had about 5 patents, but one of them went out to do it. And and then Fauci saying, "Oh, I don't know, I never met Barrick in my life." And then Fauci comes to Ireland last year, and what do? We give him a fucking medal, one of the medical institutions, and who handed it to them on behalf? The Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, the incompetent, and.
This is
I mean, you couldn't
we
script this stuff, And Miriam O'Callaghan is there in RT taking a photograph with him, and photograph here and photograph there. And when I was tweeting about it recently, I put up 4 photographs, but the 4th photograph was a set of very tatty set of underwear, and I said that was Fauci's underwear when he was leaving Dublin. His arse was licked so much there was hardly anything left of it. And
it's
that's where we are. So when I say we're in a state of manufactured ignorance, and I know I'm passionate about it, right? I'm highly accurate about it, which is why I'm not on any panels at the moment, because I wouldn't survive it.
Absolutely, Eddie, and it's just so it's the theatre of the absurd now to me. I mean, in early to mid 2020, I was very passionate, and I stayed passionate in getting truth and science out and combating this agnogenesis, which in Ireland had run riot. I mean, Ireland was comical, and I used to say 10 years ago or more, when I was working on cholesterol and statins and all this kind of fat versus carbohydrate stuff, I used to say that Ireland is basically, it's just a pawn. It's a vassal state of big pharma, because over 50% of our GDP was biotech and pharma. And I always thought back then, like you would have in early 2020, I thought it was all to do with profiteering and corporate influence in Ireland. Of course, since 2020, we got to understand it's a much bigger deal. Now, you mentioned there the history. I put out a video there of Dr. David Martin in the European Parliament last year. And on Twitter, it got 1 million views pretty quickly. And YouTube, it got 10 times normal views. Just 20 minutes of Martin railing about the history of how the COVID nonsense came about. And it's all manufactured, essentially. It's just astonishing the history he gives. So it's terrible that so few people actually understand this basic fact. I mean, we're at the stage now where all of this, what's in your book, the COVID thing, the WHO corruption, I mean, a lot's coming out with Doge and with Trump and Musk, a lot of revelations like you mentioned. A lot of it's coming out, but people are hypnotized in mass formation. They simply don't want to psychologically face that the world is 50 times more rotten, and our leaders and the big guys up top are 50 times more rotten than they ever imagined, because it's scary. It's scary for the little dears. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally accept that. I mean, that is just a fact. I mean, all you have to do is raise this topic in the local coffee shop or pub, and you'll see it straight away. I mean, that's just locally. But I mean, if you take the academic work on it, Matthias Desmet definitely leads the field. And based on my understanding of what he is saying, is that look, these mass formation events have taken place in history. He goes back into back into from the 1933 Enabling Act forward. And by the way, and that's another interesting point. The first, and thank you for your review of the book as well, by the way. The first review I got was from Vera Sharav, who was one of the last surviving Holocaust people, right?
Mm.
And she's given a resounding endorsement of the book. And thank you very much for that, because I remember when President Higgin passed the leper pass law and didn't refer to the Supreme Court, I said, sure, we may as well now just give people this star, this yellow star, and let them put it on their armband, so we can separate ourselves from these terrible unvaccinated people. And all hell broke loose. You know, I was an anti-Semite. I was this. I was that. The Auschwitz Museum got pulled into it, and so it went. And that was just an attempt to shut down. But a lot of people who had contacted me at the time said, "I know exactly what you're saying." And then weeks later, after that, we were then into throwing the people waiting on organ transplants off the organ transplant list in Beaumont Hospital. I mean,
I,
we just said, and you just go back some of the clips certainly I'll be using in the open public talks I'll be giving. I'll talk to you about that in a second. I'm going to use those clips. They're absolutely extraordinary from people that we all listen to. At least most of the Irish people were listening to the commentariat on the radio and television. The so-called journalists. Of course, there's none of them left. No journalism left. It died in quarter one 2020. None of this has been discussed. Like none of the basic fundamental issues that are flying around the place at the moment, peer-reviewed, scientific research, data crunched, and now coming up in open public discussion by the new US government. None of this is being covered by anybody. Not a single person in mainstream media is covering any of this or has any intention of covering it. None of the
but
editors will go near it. It's verboten, it's taboo, and you will not speak like this. And what does that remind you of? That's Ireland during the agnogenesis period that we were in under clerical fascism, except it's now under what I would call left-wing progressive kind of fascism, which is clamping down on anything that is counter the doctrine. Well, there's news for those people. It's game over, pal. The pendulum has swung back. There's a huge wave of change coming. It's coming across the North Atlantic, but it's coming into Europe, which is clearly changed from the European elections. The Overton window, the gap between the two extremes that are politically acceptable to people, is shifted from the left to the centre, not to the hard right, to the centre. The centre, the radical centre, let's call it that. And you can see that happening in Germany as we speak. Up and coming elections, the AfD are having an effect on that. They may end up in coalition. We'll see. They're certainly influencing policy, including the borders around Germany. We see it in Sweden. Look what's happened in Sweden last week. Absolutely appalling death count. They have huge problems. They're one of the chief rape capitals of the world now. The Swedes. They have problems with assault weapons and with explosives. I mean, gang warfare. I mean, it's not knife. They've gone way beyond knives now, you know. And so another Sweden has got a huge problem, just from
yeah,
just from overdoing it. And then what happens? We decide to voluntarily go into the EU migration pact. It was whipped. It was won by about 7 votes in the Dáil. All 15 independent TDs voted against it. I was across the road in Boswell's Hotel at the time, and the government just not one single government TD voted against it. The Danes, who had also got the opt out, we were the only two countries, ourselves and Denmark. The Danes said in Danish, "Are you joking me? Why would we voluntarily go into something we opted out from?" And what did the Irish do? What would you like us to do? You want to? We, of course, we will. And I remember when I was campaigning against the World Health Organization treaty, in the run up to the June bank holiday weekend when they were deciding on it at the World Health Assembly in Geneva, I was looking at photographs literally online of Stephen Donnelly, who lost his seat in the general election, standing next to Ghebreyesus, the chief executive officer of the WHO, grinning like a cat. I mean, as far as he was concerned, he'd made it. I'm part of the club now. And I was outside the 2 weeks before that. I was outside the World Economic Summit, or sorry, the the Global Economic Summit in Killarney, very, very well named, the opening speaker of which was the executive officer of the World Health Organization, doing the Killarney Declaration and saying that not only should we exit the World Health Organization, but anybody who's a member of the World Economic Forum, that is either a civil servant or a senior politician, needs to be told you have to get off, you have to resign from that organization, or you have to lose your position. In other words, it was contrary to the national interest. And now we're beginning to see all that play out in open sight. I mean, that's what the Americans are saying. At state level, AGs are talking about it, talking about the World Health Organization, they're talking about the World Economic Forum, they're saying the same stuff. And Trump now has pulled the Americans out of the World Health Organization. India are lining up, so are Kenya and Indonesia. And
And
more and
it,
more will come. It's coming apart.
yeah, there's noises in Italy as well, I believe, but I'm not sure what stage it's at. But it was raised. The politicians you mentioned there, Donnelly. I mean, this is pure treason because it's just de facto treason. Because what you're doing is putting completely foreign elite interests ahead of your own people who voted you in. It's just treasonous. And they get away with it because, a bit like in my corporate career, a lot of people moved up the ladder. They ignored the opinion of their fellow engineers and technologists because they were smart enough to know you only need to impress the guy up top and he will lift you up. I'm thinking of the hymn back in the old day in church, and he will raise you up. But you will be raised up, and what's uncomfortable now, all your peers thinking you're a bit of a sellout and you're nasty and you're political. Well, who cares? Because you'll be raised up above them. And this is exactly the same thing we see with all of our politicians. They're only looking at the rewards with UN plum tax-free jobs and diplomatic posts. I mean, Leo Varadkar, one of the biggest traitors in Ireland's history, he's now being brought into Harvard, just like Lucinda Ardern went to Harvard, I think, or Stanford. And they're all rewarded, not with briefcases of money in a dark parking lot like Watergate or whatever. They're rewarded with positions that technically are not illegal. They're not bribes. You promise them future riches and you give it to them apparently legitimately. It's so obvious, it drives you crazy, wouldn't it?
No, it would, yeah, but you have to remember that a lot of people who are even nearly awake, the naps, the nearly awake people, even might even be listening to this, will still be quite skeptical. I mean, like I just wanted to maybe get into that, and I understand that because I was there as well. I mean, I went along. I remember when I met you for the first time, and it took me quite a while to
Yeah.
psychologically accept whatever about the wake up moment, which I describe in the book. Beyond that, just to basically say, I've got to do something about this. This is seriously dangerous the way the world is actually really being run. And I mean that's what the when Trump 2.0 administration talks about the deep state, that's what he's talking about. And it extends, it's global. It's not just American, it's global. And we have our own what I call the neo-totalitarians in Ireland. You might some people say globalists, but like they're far more dangerous than that. Totalitarianism is far more dangerous when you understand it, which is what I get into in the book. I get into what totalitarianism is and what it isn't. I get
Well,
into, I mean, David Hughes has done great work where he's juxtapositioned the period from 1933 to 10 years later, like the beginning of the extermination of the Jews and all the other people that were affected, which, and by the way, often forgotten, the actual the Soviet Union casualties, the actual treatment of Soviet soldiers was, and the numbers involved, the killing them through starvation and forced marching and slave labor, was absolutely off the scale. I mean, this was heydays on Earth in those days, and Stalin at it himself, by the way, and his own people. They get into all of that, and what he did is he's juxtapositioned the 1933 Enabling Act sprang into action after a kind of a false flag event when the Reichstag was set on fire, and straight away Chancellor Hitler was convincing Hindenburg to give him extra powers, which he did. And of course, it was game over then. Within a couple of weeks, you had the Enabling Act, and things started off from there. But based on the work of a guy called Staunton, he then takes the 10 steps from that, the 10 steps from the sort of victimization or alienation of part of the population, making them the reason why everything is not working. In other words, they become this they become the cow that needs to be slaughtered. all the ways through to actual genocide. That's step number 9, genocide. Step 10 is the cover up of the genocide, and he covers all that and shows that we were actually between step 4 and step 5.
We were surprisingly advanced. Yeah, we were surprisingly advanced, and that's why I worked so hard on COVID Recovery Ireland, which you engaged with when you discovered how bad this was. It was so important to engage because we were very advanced. Now, it hadn't yet got to actual direct harming of people or the genocide, but it was well on its way there, and a load of boxes were ticked. And I saw that list of 10, and I remember thinking even back in late 2020 and certainly 21, when all medical informed choice was destroyed in the West overnight, I thought, wow, we're way down these 10 steps, all to play for, guys. But it's quite extraordinary, the ignorance of people. Agnogenesis is a new word to me, but recently and through the book, and you introduced me to the lady Lindsay McGoey, I think, a professor in England. This agnogenesis, I didn't know the term, but the study of it, which is an official academic field, it's the study of strategic ignorance, and whether witting or unwitting, using unknowingness to confuse the public. And it's tobacco companies was the cliched example. They would sow doubt and they would use a lack of knowledge in a very strategic way. But as she went through her oeuvre, if you will, it was just astonishing to me how it resonated. I didn't know there was a study academia kind of layer on this. Yeah, and she also, though, this is amazing, in the video I just watched this morning on my drive, my commute, she brought up Popper, right? Her Dr. Popper. And he is my hero. And in my recent critical thinking courses, and many times the last 10 years, I put up Popper and his asymmetry of proof, where you must always look for things that break your hypothesis or your belief, because that's the way you'll get strong beliefs and strong hypotheses. He's my hero. But she brought him up in the context of this too, that he, exactly like her, said it is so dangerous to have people with more knowledge have dominance in voting or in any system of governance, because often there's groupthink. That was his problem with it. They are avoiding, and they will subconsciously and consciously avoid ever questioning their own beliefs, because their salary depends on those and their power depends on those. So you must never go to a system where the experts carry more sway than the layperson. This is fundamental stuff. Maybe give me some more of your thoughts on Lindsay.
It is, yeah, when you run across it, isn't it always the case? You kind of go, Christ, it's right there in front of my eyes all the time. I just didn't know what it was. Your gut was telling you something, but then somebody's done a field of study and they've actually opened it all up. They've cracked it open, like Matthias Desmet's work on on mass formation. For me, was an absolute eye opener. Now, his work was criticized, and I covered the criticism of his work, by the way, by the people that criticize him, but not going far enough. And I think that's why he's bringing out a second book, based on chatting to him recently. And it's great because it's giving people the skills to see propaganda for what it is. But I also cover why is it that if you look at Ireland, Ireland is just, it's Pravda. I mean, the entire system, bar with the exception of Grip perhaps, and but I mean, outside of that, the editors, they've it all locked. It's all locked down. I mean, I know, like, I've spoken to them. Will you take this out? No. Well, why not? Nobody's interested in talk. No, there's no interest in that. Yes, but we're a member of the World Health Organization, and they're about to bring in a treaty which would be binding on Ireland, because they've removed the non-binding clause 164 times in the paper. Sure, nobody's interested in that. Like, this is editorial level. This is the shite you're actually being fed. And then it's no wonder then when you go into a coffee shop or a pub or anything like that, and there's a discussion, and you open up the door, you may as well be looking at a field of mushrooms as opposed to a field of people, because that's what it feels like sometimes. And occasionally one of the people steps out and they're not a mushroom, being fed a load of bullshit. They're actually they're just waking up, a bit like one of the Alien movies, like just waking up, and it's wonderful to see. And I'm getting a lot of that now. People coming over, not because of anything I've said or you've said, but they're picking it up. And I think what's actually driving it is actual day-to-day experience. People are saying, well, such and such, they have nothing but health problems since the jabs, since COVID. And such has got turbo cancer. What's that? Well, they're turning up with late stage 3 or early stage 4 cancer all of a sudden, and they're young. And oncologists are talking quietly amongst themselves all over the world, well, amongst themselves in Ireland. They're talking openly all over the world about the surge that they're seeing in extraordinary cancers in people that shouldn't be getting it. And this is because, I mean, I've interviewed Professor Angus Dalgleish, who's a leading international oncologist. He's based in Britain. He's an immunologist and virologist to boot, and he was on the board of an mRNA company. I mean, you can go further than that to get a view. And he's saying quite baldly, the mRNA vaccine is not fit for human consumption. It's very dangerous, needs to be taken off the market. And he explains why the immune system just simply, he says, it's like flogging a dead horse. It just claps out. And that's why people are getting all of these things. And then he goes on to say a lot more than that. And he gave a review in the book. And I was delighted with that because I said, here we go. Finally, we're now gathering the evidence. Like, it's beginning to come together. And therefore, and I would say this to young journalists. There's no point in talking to the editors because they're all covering. Ireland is now an operation cover up. Be quite clear on that. It's an operation cover up. It won't last very long because there's a tsunami of data coming and change coming, and it's coming from across the North Atlantic, and it's also going to catch on in Europe because Europe is quite game ball now for this because of the political change in Europe. People are fed up with it. They're fed up with being misled, and they're fed up with the other aspects of totalitarianism that are, as you know, it's an omni-war. We're seeing it with open borders. We're seeing it with attempts to redefine the definition of family, and we're seeing it with the queering of kids in classrooms. That's all part of the destabilization agenda, which
And
is how you create control of human beings. You take away the glue that keeps them together, especially countries, homogenous countries like Ireland that are very difficult to break down. And
well,
that's why we get such a focus here.
yeah, as Peter Sutherland, I mean, head of Goldman Sachs, nominally Irish, they wrote the book Globalist about him and his horrifying visages on the front cover. He stated in 2009, I think it was, or 10, he said we need to smash nationality and sovereignty in all the European nations. And the method was mass migration. In another interview around that time, he specifically said we need to get rid of this notion of bringing over skilled people from far-flung countries. We need to break that one also. In other words, we need to stuff in unskilled. So he was clearly an agent of the globalist pan-European dream, just to create a big melting pot blob, right, where no one had nationality or sovereignty or a belief in their own customs and history that makes individual countries strong and diverse. These guys, the globalists, want to destroy diversity, make a big blob, but you can be damn sure they're maintaining their own diversity for themselves. And their families and their elite buddies, they're all staying together and maintaining their own culture, even though it's rotten. So this is so obvious, and I might put on the screen as I'm talking through this, just what you mentioned. I did a chart showing all of the globalist, or totalitarian, of course, policies and strategies. And they're all joined up thinking, and they're all synergistic, from the CBDC, the climate nonsense, the transifying and all the sex stuff, the COVID program, anti-meat agenda. They've all got clear goals, and they're all self and cross-reinforcing with the other goals to weaken society and get us more malleable into a brown blob of humanity that's just easy to manage. And if we're fat and sick as well, all their buddies in Big Pharma and Big Food can help with that aim. I mean, it's so obvious.
Well, it is when it's explained like that to people that are open, that are critically thinking about, prepared to think critically about it. But for many people, they just put their hands over their ears because it's the enormity of it is staggering. But I mean, this is how totalitarianism took off in the last century, and we're no better than the people who were knocking around then. I mean, we grew up thinking, it's the Germans. They're very much prone to that kind of thing, And then the Irish would think are thinking we looking across over and what's going on in the United States. We're saying they're mad. They're all mad. Sure, we know more about this than the Americans know themselves. That's the Irish exceptionalism thing. The Irish, like, we actually think we're smart. We're not. We're actually really stupid as a race when it comes to understanding how the world works, and
Well,
easily manipulated and easily falling into manufactured ignorance. I would probably say one of the most vulnerable nations in the world for it, because we don't venerate critical thinkers. Do you know what we do? We throw them out the door.
we shut them down. And my wife the other day was up the road, and there was a neighbour, and he's a nice guy, kind of corporate guy, and he was railing on about Trump and coming out with all of these nonsense tropes straight from the Irish Times and RTE. Because when I was in corporate, senior managers, you'd get Irish Times every morning on your desk. You're literally being fed daily the worst Irish Slimes propaganda and anti-Trumpism and pro-mass migration. And it's fed into you every day. So they're very clever. They make sure the more senior people, more influential, senior managers and academics, they're all force-fed the propaganda even more than the ordinary person. And this guy was coming out with trope after trope, and she didn't bother setting them right. She asked a few questions, probing questions, but what about X and Y? And he got a little uncomfortable because he expected her as an engineer, and me, her husband, as an engineer, that we would agree with him, that Trump is the devil incarnate, Putin is the devil incarnate, Putin could storm Europe. I mean, complete nonsense, right? And then it's pathetic. You're right, the stupidest people in many ways.
Well, I mean, people just don't want to engage with it because for a lot of them, it's their reputations at stake. The leaders. I
Yeah.
mean, and they're in Operation Cover Up. For the rest, they will eventually come across. But what you'll now see is something between denial of what's going on to kind of beginning to accept it, but then splitting hairs, saying, "Well, I knew it. I knew it all along. Do you know what? I said that all along. We'll get an awful lot of that. They'll be there in their hundreds of I feckin' knew it. I feckin' told you. I was right. Yeah, but where did you broadcast it? Where did you write it? What did you do about it? Well, I just knew it. I just knew it. I had them figured out. Well, you did
Well,
never.
unless if you've done a cancelling back in those insane days, you might not really want to engage with that one. It was funny, I think I told you before the story, I was cancelled around 8 or 9 people in a group of friends that went back 6 years to college. No problem for 35 years. Everything was great. Trips and family and wives were friends and everything. Ironically, when COVID came up and I was straight out the door saying, this is nonsense, lockdown's nonsense, this is seasonal, masks? Are you joking me? Sure, we've got all the science on masks. They do nothing for aerosol transmission, corona or influenza. We know this. And they were getting very uncomfortable around half of them. But by August, there was a barbecue and my wife had to warn me not to do a roll of honour there and be arrogant, because they all knew I was right on everything and it was accepted. But then when the vaccine came out and I questioned the vaccine, boom! One or two of them particularly came in hard, influenced others. But the irony is, there's a case where, broadly speaking, they broadly knew I was correct on everything in stuff where I oughtn't have been, because all of the experts I was conflicting with. And yet I turned out to be correct on everything, and only when it came to the jungle juice, the mRNA nonsense, when I questioned that, oh, you can't question that, ooh, social embarrassment, ooh. And
Here's where it's changed now, though. We're now into 2025. We're post, the so-called pandemic. The data is now coming through all over the place. So therefore, the pendulum now is swinging dramatically. And on a one to whatever about saying, well, they and this is and that crowd over there and they their heads in the sand. Leave aside all that. That's all true, and I covered it in the book, and I give the psychological, sociological, economic reasons for why that's happening, tapping into the research in the field, and putting it all together into an arc of the story. But at the end of the story, what I say is, look, very recently over the summer, while I was finalizing the first draft of this yoke, Breaking Totalitarianism. By the way, the link for which will be at the end of the video here. And you can get it free. It's free. You can download it onto your phone for nothing. You can also buy, by the way, you can buy an audio version and get a cultured Cork accent. Yeah, there you go.
Now that's just the contents page, so 500 pages. Absolutely the best book you could possibly read on the modern manifestation of totalitarianism.
Well, thanks for saying that. I put a lot of effort into it, as you know, and so the thing is that at the end of the book, I'm there, and it's been 3 years since I met this guy, very smart guy, and having a glass of wine, and he said, "And what are you doing these days?" I said, "I'm just bringing out a book actually in a few months' time." "Oh well, what is it?" It will be called Breaking Totalitarianism. And it will be about what's gone on over the last 4 years, and it will include climate change, by the way, and all of the taboos. And he's looking at me, and he said, "Oh, I don't believe any of that." And I said, "This is an intelligent, highly intelligent guy." And I said, "Do you mind me asking you just one simple question?" And he knows me well enough to know what was coming, right? And I said to him, "What happened in 2009 on the definition of a pandemic? And were there any minutes of the meeting taken? But what actually happened? Can you tell me that?" And he looked at me with his glass of wine in his hand, and he said, "I've no idea what you're talking about." And I said, "The definition of a pandemic was changed by the World Health Organization to remove high mortality and high morbidity so that anything could be called a pandemic. That happened in 2009, and you didn't know that. But yet, but yet, you believe that all of this is nonsense. But you basically didn't understand the first thing about what's gone on. So how can anything that you have held dear in your head can have any validity?" I said, so therefore, and then I didn't say this to him, but it came to me later, and I now use it regularly. And on a one-to-one basis, it is now permissible for people who think like us to say to the people that are in this manufactured ignorance stage, and quite happy to stay in it, to tell them that they have failed. You have failed on 3 counts, I now tell people. You have failed in critical thinking. You have failed in morality. And you have failed in personal courage. It's your failure we're talking about here. It is not what I've written in my book or what I'm saying. You're the problem.
Yeah, and you know, that's why my wife found it astonishing that I was dealt extremely well with that cancelling, even though it would be horrific for most people in that scenario. Because of that, it's a form of good righteousness. When you know you're correct, all your experts, massive network around the world, have dotted the I's, crosses the T's. You know you're correct on everything, and then the people who don't like that, just because of a bit of social, reputation, potentially, no big deal actually. They're not their brother's keeper with me, but just the smell of it, a little bit of social awkwardness, boom. So I'm never going to want people like that around me in any case. I'll always get new people with principles who don't fail on those 3 things.
Yeah, here's the huge problem. Have I got it there? Oh, I have one of them there. Here's the huge problem that they face, and that's that the incoming health secretary in the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has written 2 prosecutorial books, about 1,000 pages of highly detailed facts, backed up by enormous amounts of references. And neither of those, one of them is called the real Anthony Fauci, who, by the way, got a presidential pardon. Why did he get a presidential pardon? Because he had committed crime. It's as simple as that. Why would he need a president? Why would he need a presidential pardon if he hadn't got something that was enormously difficult for him? And he's at the center of the US bioweapons industry. That's quite clear. But we meddled him, notwithstanding that. But the thing is that Kennedy's 2 books, just his 2 books, have not been challenged. In America, like the mothership of litigation, not one single piece of litigation on his books. And they're not just books, they're prosecutions of evidence, because he's a lawyer by background.
They are, Eddie, but even better than that, I saw a clip and shared it a while back. Apparently, with all the stuff he's come out with, and people are calling him conspiracy theorist and anti-V, which is all nonsense, clearly to anyone with a brain or a critical thinker, he has never been challenged. And when he has challenged others, he's won. believe he has a spotless record. So even a mushroom, oh, but of course, none of the mushrooms will ever be allowed to know what I just said.
Yeah. Well, they won't want to read it. They're certainly not going to pick it up under the current editorial leadership in mainstream media. They just won't. And I mean, RT's gone. Like they got the big bung to 750 million, and that's the end of that. You can forget it. I mean, remember, as I said earlier on, it was 10 years after we took thalidomide off the market before RT feigned to do an investigation into it in 1974. And it stayed on the market for 4 years, deforming Irish children. That's this kind of agnogenesis we are in Ireland culturally, and we're back in it again. And so, like, I get a lot, I'm sure you do as well, a lot of tropes thrown at me, especially in social media. Expect that kind of stuff. But I'm now go just bald-headed occasionally. I just go bald-headed and say, well, failure critical thinking, failure of morality, failure of courage. And there's no answer to that because it's true. And, getting people to self-reflect. You haven't, people coming on. I had an engagement there the other day. The Cass report is quite, talking about the whole trans agenda, right, and the activism in school and all the rest of it, and what's gone through the Irish curriculum, which is just ideology, is now all contrary to the actual science, which says that when children are feeling the opposite of euphoria, of course, is dysphoria. When they're feeling like that, the last thing you should be doing is affirming it and getting all the kids in the class to get into this delusion, but actually put together. So they got rid of the whole gender identity service in the UK, and they've replaced it now with 8 regional centres comprised of multidisciplinary teams. And the top doctor in each team is guess what their objective is: child safety. Child safety. One, and everything else second. No ideology here. And any emphasis given on transitioning must be counterbalanced by an equal level of evidence or level of affirmation around detransitioning. And there must be follow-up studies, which there isn't. People are transitioning and then they're just left there. There's nobody going back scientifically to measure, well, did that work? How do you feel now? And unfortunately, when they did go and look at it, they found there is absolutely no evidence that any of this has any positive impact across the general population that attempted. This is extraordinary stuff that we are still, despite the Cass report and our next door neighbours, which was out since April last year, we're still adopting an ideology which was from activism from 1979 called WPATH. And that's what the Department of Education promote. That's what the teachers are talking about. That's why there's no workbooks from these classes that the kids are in, being allowed home. I mean, this is being rammed down kids' throats at the moment, and it's fucking dangerous. And we know that because we have the science now to prove it. So therefore, if you're a teacher listening to this, which you probably not, because you don't want to hear it, if you're a teacher or if you're a community leader or if you're doing anything that relates to children, if you think that it will be a defense, because there's going to be serious consequences for people that do this. Medical consequences of throwing all these hormones into their bodies for the rest of their lives, and the actual lifelong revenue for the pharmaceutical industry is calculated at €1 billion, or sorry, €1 million per patient. There's huge money involved. I mean, isn't there always? And the damage done to these little kids' bodies, cutting off their breasts, all that kind of stuff. If you think that you're safe now today in 2025 because you were following orders from the Department of Education, or that the minister for this or minister for that, who's no longer a minister because the Greens are now gone, as you know, or if you think that that's going to be a defence, it isn't, because the Cass report is out now nearly a year, and that's the science, that's the benchmark. And if you're not following the Cass report, you are damaging the children in your care. That's what any good barrister will be saying in evidence in the High Court appearances in Ireland that are inevitable over the next number of years, because this is what's going to happen. It is going to end up in massive problems for everybody engaged in this. So we need to be calm, cool, collected, go and study Cass and implement the Cass report, and don't wait for the Department of Propaganda or Education, I should give it its right name, about this to actually turn the ship around, because they ain't for turning. Because the political class that brought in all of this crap are the same political class we put back into power, with the exception of the Greens. So and there is no leader out there at the moment. Cass, if you do a search on Cass, the CASS report in the Irish media, it doesn't turn up. Doesn't turn up. Agnogenesis again. It doesn't exist. We're exceptional in Ireland. Shall we know? Shall we've it all figured out. You know, we're one of the last tribes of Israel. We had then we had before the
Hey,
Celts, we had the two-a-day Donnan, and then we countered the British for 800 years. We finally drove them out of the country. We're a wonderful people. Listen to all the songs and the Cayley and the crack. We're all of those things, but we're also the most vulnerable to manufactured ignorance. And we are in a high state of agnogenesis in Ireland at the moment, and it's everywhere. And it's very damaging.
yeah, absolutely, Eddie. Well, I know you wanted to wrap it around 40 minutes, so we'll move on. But yeah, Ireland is now the agnogenesis capital of Europe, if not the world. And it's improving though with Cass report and much more from the far side of the Atlantic, as you rightly said. Things are changing and people are waking up. There was a somber note where they disallowed the elections, I think, in Romania. That just shows you that the rats will try and hold on to the ship before they leave. But yeah, I think their days are numbered.
Yeah, I just want to end on like it's not this is not all just attack on the existing. I mean, what I'm saying is that we are at a pivot point. Actually, the pivot point was the 1st of May last year when all 47 US senators came out and wrote to Biden and said, under no circumstance can you sign the WHO treaty. The 1st of May, the minute I saw it, I said it's over. They're screwed now. The big beasts are coming out into the space, and then of course the Japanese have been fantastic on this, and the Australians are kicking off the shackles as well and getting stuck in. Everybody's getting stuck in, as you know, across Europe as well. But in Ireland, oh, the Irish exception still reigns. We'll be the last. We'll lead from behind, and such a tragedy. It's such a tragedy for such a race of people to allow themselves to get into this state of ignorance. But I mean, look, it is changing, and so what's going to happen is that this big wave of change is coming. There is no going back to this progressive left wokey. There's no going back. It's dead. It's finished. It's over. Why do you think the Greens got thrown out? It's all part of it. And the pronouns are gone off Simon Harris's social media. Like you can see them ditching pronouns, DEI, diversity, equality, and diversity. Anyway, the DEI is gone from corporate life. They're just chucking. They can't get it off their shoulders fast enough in corporate America. And why is that? Because it was all crap. And we all knew it was crap, but we played along with the theatre. And it's all now coming to a crashing end as they look into the US AID budget and they see $70,000 going into some bloody RTE production on DEI,
Well, I might say to you, there's so many coming out. Mike Benz had a tweet yesterday on USAID. If people aren't familiar, it's basically deep State Department money going to every wacko project around the world. That's on my
Yeah.
strategic root cause diagram. So USAID has funded all branches of the globalist totalitarian plan. Everything. And the most funny one I saw in the last day or two, out of around 30 of these, 20 million was given to Iraq to run a Sesame Street clone for Iraqis in Iraq to teach them about inclusion and DEI. $20 million to do effing Sesame Street for Iraqis to teach them nonsense, right? Crazy.
But like as we speak, trans organizations are being given access to kids in classrooms to advocate on behalf of transitioning. And there's no health and safety study done on the impact on children at all. They're just being allowed in. I mean, that's happening, and parents don't know this because it's been they're being separated and alienated. All of that is leading into the destabilization of society for the purposes of basically destroying the basic bonds of society, into which then you can implement your totalitarian control. But we now know it's not going to work because it's falling apart in the United States and it will fall apart in Europe. It's game over. So I would say to all those that find all of this deeply uncomfortable and are spitting as they're listening to it, look, the game is over. The best thing you can do now is to quietly change ground and to come over on the side of the Irish people, because the Irish people have been the subject of an orchestrated fraud on behalf of the state and the establishment against them. They weren't protected by the office of the president, whose job it is to protect the Irish people who predate the state by centuries from state overreach. That didn't happen either. So the entire thing failed. The medical people failed. The lawyers failed in large numbers to get stuck in. All of the establishment that you would expect to step forward and defend the Irish people ran for cover. And that by the way, Ireland wasn't unique in that regard, but it's very concentrated here, and only a handful stood up, and that was because of the fear that was generated. All of that was planned for decades in advance and implemented. You have to say brilliantly by people that were highly resourced, and they're all now being fired and pulled out of positions in the United States. So the real question then for us is, will Trump will his administration actually make American democracy great again, or because I think he's facing a fork in the road, or is he going to attempt to replace the deep state with his own version of it? And a new oligarchy. That's the question. That's the real question now that we need to be focusing on over the next number of years. We'll see the evidence of all of that emerging. But at the moment, he's making some very important moves, including putting in R.F. Kennedy into that. That's a critical thing. And I challenge anybody to pick up his two books and read them, and not come out the other side absolutely terrified at how the world works when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry, because it's the only impact it could have on you.
Yeah, well, maybe you could use the word terrified, but at the end of the day, informed. I mean, I always, at the start of COVID, a couple of people said to me, and it crossed.
So you're much more stoic than I am, Ivor.
Well, I try. I'm doing workshops on it, so I should be, I guess. But no, I was worried at the start of COVID. If I actually tell people the data and they actually realized correctly what I tell them, that this thing is a bad flu equivalent and everyone's gone insane, it might actually upset them more. And a few people wrote to me asking, Ivor, are you worried about that? That if people realize what's going on here, they'll actually get stressed? And I said, yeah, I'm always concerned about people, but I think it's vastly more important to know, because they're going to destroy the future for our children and grandchildren. And who wants to look back and say, I wish I knew what was going on? I basically allowed it. So that's the important principle. So it's all about getting the message out. You know what? Maybe the Irish have disgraced themselves en masse, but then like a few good men, you know, we have you and me and COVID Recovery Ireland and those doctors who stood up. So in the end, you know, recovering sanity for the masses, it'll always come down to individuals, growing numbers, but still a minority, but growing minority. And
it's cracking in America.
It's cracking.
And therefore it'll crack here eventually, but it is cracking.
Last thing, the best website to pick up the book. I know there'll be many probably.
No, it's all in one. It's all in one area. I'll send you that. I'll give you the link and you can put it on. Actually, you have it in your. I'll send you. Yeah, you have it already, but I'll resend it. And that gives you everything, all the background and so on. And then you can get it for free. You can just go down onto your phone. There it is. It's nothing. It's for nothing. You can make a donation while you're doing that if you want to, by the way. But you can just put in 00. I'm putting nothing into this. And you'll get it for nothing. You can get, as I said, the audio version. You can get a soft copy and you can get a hard copy. They come in from Amazon France and Germany, unless you're a member of Prime and you can access Amazon and Amazon UK. It's just a complex bloody thing, Amazon. And that's it. So this isn't in the shops. This is direct. And it's because I couldn't find an Irish. Well, one was kind of interested, but they were very nervous. But like, Irish publishers won't go near this because they're just like everybody else. They're keeping their heads down. No, they'll be all over it in a few years' time. There'll be books flying off the shelves about all of this once it becomes safe to do so. And then all of the people will step forward. All the experts from the economists that never saw inflation coming. All of that gang. All of the doctors that never spoke up, all of the politicians that never opened their mouths about what was going on, the political leaders, the commentariat, they'll be in their queues with their books and their interviews and their comments and their deep insights, looking out the rearview window of the car, and having absolutely demonized and excoriated those that look out the front window of the car for a living.
Yeah, absolute nest of vipers, parasites, the bloody lot of them. Okay, thanks so much, Eddie. We'll catch you again and see how things are going in a few months.
Okay, Ivor. Stay in touch.
Good man, thank you. Hope you enjoyed that lively chat, folks. And the link to Eddie's free book is down below in the description box. And also for those of you interested in critical thinking or mental strength and resilience or weight loss or other things, ivorcumminsworkshops.com. That's where you'll find my new workshops in studio with interaction of the audience. I run them every week or two, and you'll see the next dates in each of the links on the web page should you wish to join us and advance your learning in key areas. Thank you.